In this video, we're going to talk about cloud costs from a bigger picture perspective and how to think about them when working with AWS. The goal is to move beyond some basics and really understand what drives cost when you move from a traditional environment into the cloud. Once you get this mindset, all the detailed pricing topics start to feel a lot more natural. To get there, let's first take a step back and look at where we are coming from. Organizations have traditionally run applications in their own data centers or co-location facilities. Those models required big upfront investment in hardware and buildings, long planning cycles, and a lot of effort just to keep things running. Cloud platforms like AWS evolved from that world, offering the same core capabilities like compute, storage, networking, but as on-demand services instead of things you have to buy and manage yourself. Let's start with a key concept, TCO, or total cost of ownership. TCO means you don't just look at the sticker price of a server or a line item in your cloud bill. Instead, you look at everything you pay for over the full time of running that workload. For example, imagine a traditional on-premises data center. You don't just buy a server once and you're done. You pay for the hardware itself, meaning servers, storage, network equipment, and firewalls. Then the people, the engineers and admins who design, install, patch, and troubleshoot that hardware. Of course, the facility, which means physical space, rack, power, cooling, and internet connectivity. And of course, resilience and protection, meaning backup systems, disaster recovery, and maybe even a second physical site. And upgrades and replacements, which when you run out of capacity or when hardware reaches end of life, you use them. So even if the initial purchase of a server looks cheap compared to the cloud bill stretch over many months, the total cost of that data center adds up quickly once you include all those extra pieces. Alternatives to AWS here include self-managed virtualization platforms or bare metal servers in co-location facilities. Those can be powerful, but they push most of the responsibility for design, scaling, and ongoing operations back onto your team. AWS takes those same building blocks and delivers them as managed services. So you rent what you need instead of owning and running the entire stack yourself. Now, let's compare that to running in the cloud with AWS. You pay as you go for compute, storage, and network as you actually use them. AWS takes care of the building, power, cooling, and physical security. AWS manages the hardware lifecycle, meaning installation, replacement, and failures, and your main costs become the cloud services you consume and the people designing and running your applications. If you only compare this on-prem server versus that EC2 instance, over a long period, on-prem might look sometimes cheaper, but once you factor in design, maintenance, facilities, and risk, the cloud often gives you much better TCO for many types of workloads. So with that high-level comparison in mind, let's dig into some AWS's common advantages of cloud computing, especially around cost. The first one is moving from fixed expense to variable expense. In a traditional setup, buying server is a fixed expense. You commit a large amount of money upfront, and then you keep paying to run that hardware whether it's busy or almost idle. In the cloud, your cost becomes a variable expense. You spin resources up when you need them and shut them down when you don't. Your monthly bill can rise and fall with your actual usage instead of being tied to a fixed pile of hardware that you already paid for. This actually shift changes on how you think about costs. It's less about long-term bets on capacity and more about aligning spend with real demand. The second one is taking advantage of economies of scale. AWS buys hardware, power, network capacity at a massive scale and runs data center all over the world. Because of that, AWS gets very good pricing and can optimize its infrastructure in a way that are hard for a single company to match. When you use AWS, you're actually sharing those economies of scale. AWS does the heavy lifting with vendors and infrastructure optimization, and you pay for a slice of that large, efficient platform. This doesn't mean everything is always cheaper in every case, but it does mean AWS has a strong base for cost-efficient infrastructure that you can tap into. Next, you can stop guessing capacity and use elastic capacity. In on-prem, you usually buy for peak load. If you expect a big traffic spike once a year, maybe a sale or a product launch or tax season, you often need to own enough servers to handle that spike. The rest of the year, a big chunk of that capacity might be underused. But in AWS, you can treat capacity as elastic. Services like auto-scaling lets you increase or decrease capacity based on actual demand. For example, during quiet periods, you scale down and your resource usage and your costs go down, and during busy periods, you scale up quickly without waiting for new hardware to arrive. So, long story short, instead of guessing years in advance, you just as you go, which reduces both over-provisioning and under-provisioning. With cloud, you also increase speed and agility. In a traditional environment, getting a new server often looks like approval, budgeting, ordering a hardware, waiting for delivery, installing it, configuring it, testing it, and so on. And weeks or a month later, you're finally ready. But in the cloud, you can launch new environments in minutes. That speed changes how teams work. You can experiment quickly, try new ideas, and shut things down if they're not needed. Or you cut down the time and cost tied up in slow, manual processes, and you get features and changes out to users much faster. Beyond speed and elasticity, there's also a strategic shift in what your teams spend their time and money on. Running your own data center means you're pour time and money into things like power and cooling, hardware failures and replacements, physical security and access controls, cabling, racking, and on-site maintenance. Most of that doesn't directly make your product better for your customers. But with AWS, you offload most of that undifferentiated work that lets you invest more in developers, architects, and more managed services that directly support your applications, and spend less time babysitting infrastructure and more time building features, improving reliability, and refining the user experience. And the next benefit is going global in minutes. If you want infrastructure in another country using a traditional model, it's a huge project. New buildings or colocation contracts, local vendors, hiring staff, dealing with regulations, and so on. But in AWS, you can deploy workloads into multiple regions all around the world in a very short time. You can place applications closer to users in different geographies, reducing latency. You can test new markets without building full data centers. And if something doesn't work out, you can scale down again just as quickly. Now, if you remember well-architected framework from our previous videos, you remember that one of its pillars is cost optimization. It emphasizes on designing for efficiency from day one, meaning choosing the right services and architectures so you're not wasting resources, or choosing smart pricing models. For example, knowing when on-demand fits and when long-term options like saving plans or reserved instances make sense for stable, predictable workloads, or reviewing and refining regularly, meaning checking what's actually being used, turning off or downsize what isn't, and taking advantage of new AWS features or instance types as they come out. There's also a link between cost and sustainability as well. If you use fewer resources and design your systems to be efficient, you're not just lowering the bill, you're also reducing the environmental footprint behind the scenes because fewer physical servers and less energy are needed to support your workloads. So with all of that in mind, let's summary and bring everything together and look at the key ideas you should take away from this video. First, total cost of ownership. That's all the direct and indirect costs over time and not just what you see on the bill for a single resource. Then consider variable versus fixed expenses. With AWS, you're paying for what you actually use rather than locking yourself into capacity you had to guess upfront. On top of that, AWS gives you economies of scale where you benefit from the size and purchasing power of the global cloud provider, And this naturally ties into elastic capacity and agility, meaning you can scale up and down quickly as demand changes without long procurement cycles or wasted resources. All of this lets you focus on what really differentiates your business, while AWS takes care of the undifferentiated heavy lifting behind the scenes. And finally, there is global reach, the ability to deploy closer to your users all around the world without massive upfront investment in the infrastructure. All right, that is it for this video, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this helpful, please make sure you're subscribed to your YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next video.